English translation 521st Contact Friday, the 3rd of June, 2011, 9:08 hours.
Hello, dear friend. You threw me out of my bed this morning. 9 o'clock in the morning is the middle of the night for me, because I do not go to bed until the early hours of the morning.
Greetings, Edward. It must be that I come here so early, because there are some important things to discuss that cannot be put off and cannot be mentioned openly. It is a matter of...
Then I think we have said everything that needed to be discussed.
That is so, yes.
What concerns me now is the fact that the Serbian war criminal Mladic has finally been arrested and extradited to the International War Tribunal. Apart from this criminal, there are many others. Some who have been sentenced, but others are still at large, such as Muammar al-Gaddafi in Libya, Saleh in Yemen, whose correct name is Ali Abdullah Saleh, and Bashar al-Assad in Syria. I remember his father Hafiz al-Assad, who took over as Prime Minister and Minister of Defense in a military coup in 1970-71, and then also as the autocratic president in 1971. He was a megalomaniac who aspired to Syria's leadership in the Arab world and wanted to see himself as its leader, but he was not successful. He was not better than his son, who was an ophthalmologist, and who, as a powerful man of state, now had the human beings shot and murdered by his military. When I arrived in the 1960s from Turkey via the border stations of Reyhanli and Bab el Hawa, which means Gate of the Winds, to Syria, Halep respectively Aleppo and then to Hama, Homs and Damascus, the Syrian people briefly rose up against the brutal dictatorship. And Assad Sr., who also became Chief of the Air Force and Minister of Defense, summarily raised anti-aircraft guns in Damascus and fired them into the groups of people. The anti-aircraft guns were Swiss products, but I do not know whether they were officially bought by Switzerland or by arms dealers. I saw with my own eyes what was done with the guns in the groups of people. But the world just kept quiet about it, because I never heard any radio reports about it, nor did I find any newspaper reports, although I searched for them in various newspapers in Europe. It is monstrous, I think, that even today, there are still people in power who can terrorize their people or half the world without being held to account on a global scale, but who are still granted asylum in other countries when they have to flee their country, which they ruined, and whose people they tyrannized and sometimes murdered. But there are also states which act as world police, and whose state officials are no better. Even if they do not tyrannize their own people, but still force their military into wars which they instigate and conduct in foreign states. In the same circle also belong states which ally themselves with warring states by the decisions of their powers and support them, as it is the case, for example, in Iraq and Afghanistan, where various military forces of different states have allied themselves with the USA and order their soldiers to go to war. In Germany, for example, quite contrary to what was written on the railway wagons rattling through the destroyed country after the Second World War, like Never Again War. The power game of the states of all powerful states, which do not need to be named specifically because they are well known, is based on the view and conviction that only crises, revolutions and wars and the innumerable human sacrifices resulting from them, as well as the immense destruction, make their peoples mentally mature to join in the crying of the statesmen and advocate torture, the death penalty, wars and crimes against humanity. This is especially the case with those all too familiar states which seek world domination by all mean and evil means imaginable, whereby the forced spread of their language is also important and a means to an end, as are the use of torture and the death penalty, and the invasion of foreign states by war. Wars, in particular, are the fundamental means to achieve the goal of world domination. Wars also promote the arms industry and the economy as a whole in the warring countries concerned and also strengthen the national army. When such companies are defeated, even they are exploited to the best advantage in terms of political, economic, and military power, which is the primary goal of all power-obsessed states. This truth is proven by the fact alone that since the end of the Second World War, power states all over the world have been constantly generating political and military conflicts and launching wars, with well-known state secret services playing murderous roles. One need only think of the Suez Crisis, the Cuban Crisis, the coups in Chile and El Salvador, Afghanistan, the Gulf War, the Iraq War, Vietnam, the war in former Yugoslavia, Serbia, Croatia, Bosnia, Herzegovina, where mass murders of Islamic believers were also commonplace, as in Srebrenica. And one must also think of many other hotbeds of revolution and war around the world, where state powers of certain powerful states and their murderous secret services had and still have their dirty fingers in the pie. But one must also think of all the inhuman atrocities during the Second World War, the persecution and mass murder of the Jews, the atomization of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the massacre of My Lai on 18th of March 1968, the Falkland War and the permanent focus of war, Palestine-Israel, etc., etc. These are things, dear friend, which I often think about, because this should be known in every nation throughout the world, and everyone should act in such a way that they would be free from warmongers, dictators, tyrants, and despots, so that true democracies could be built. But I think that the human beings in general look only for themselves and wallow in their own worries, but also indulge only in their own lusts, pleasures, and personal well-being, and in so doing, as a result of complete indifference, let all the evil in the world simply be and happen. The life and well-being of other people is usually of no importance to them, or if their conscience is stirring, they calm it down simply by donating a little bit of money to an aid organization. But they don't care about the real and bad things that happen in the world outside, because it is so far away and does not concern them. When I think about these facts, I feel sick and hurt.
You call the facts as they are given, but Earth humans really do not care about them, as you mentioned correctly. In truth, they have fallen into a profound indifference and superficiality which they themselves are not able to perceive, because these factors have become irresponsible habits. And what you say about the machinations of the power-obsessed state powers of various states, unfortunately, is exactly what leads to enormous crimes worldwide, through wars, secret services, the military, and through inhuman, life-despising, and murderous legislation, such as torture and the death penalty. But we have often talked about such things uselessly.
It is exactly the same as with predictions, because everything is only superficially noted, so it is already gone from memory and erased as soon as it is no longer mentioned. This is also evident again in Fukushima, and also here in Switzerland, among a certain section of the population and the government. The great horror is over, and so the irresponsible scramble continues with nuclear power stations, and thus with nuclear energy. There is loud talk of the highest possible safety standards for nuclear power stations, and that they should continue to operate for a long time to come, instead of being shut down as quickly as possible, which would be possible within 8–10 years if pollutant-free power stations were built using renewable energies, such as thermal power stations using heat from the depths of the Earth, which we discussed at the 516th Official Contact Conversation on the 14th of March 2011. If work were done at full speed in this respect, instead of making stupid slogans and falling prey to the greed for profit, the nuclear power stations could be completely shut down and dismantled in a short time. In fact, this would be the most effective and correct solution. The production of electrical energy from solar energy in such a way that all the world's needs could be met is just as illusory as the production of energy from hydroelectric power stations and wind power. With regard to the harmfulness of air and environmental pollution as well as water pollution, power stations that run on gas, coal, and oil are also worth mentioning. These have also made a major contribution to climate change, which is now unstoppable because it is too late, and all forms of natural disaster are becoming more violent, devastating, and destructive. Hydroelectric and wind power were good and correct as long as the energy needs could be met without problems due to low population and industrial plants, etc. But this is no longer possible today due to overpopulation and all that goes with it. The fact is that the more the overpopulation grows, the more industry and the economy as a whole grow, and therefore, of course, also the demand for electrical energy. This means, however, that the longer the more new sources of energy have to be sought, and energy power plants built, almost to the point of inexhaustibility. If there were a normal global population in terms of numbers, then hydroelectric and wind power plants would be fully sufficient to generate the electrical energy that mankind needs. Of course, solar, hydroelectric and wind power stations are to be advocated if they do not impair the landscape and the flora and fauna, but also the well-being of the human beings and the usability of land for food cultivation. This means, therefore, that, in line with the global demand for electrical energy, not enough such plants can be built that would be sufficient to meet the electrical energy demand. This is because far too much of nature and landscapes would be destroyed, and the life of fauna, flora, and the human being would be extremely dangerously disadvantaged. With regard to the well-being of nature, the human beings, and the fauna and flora, this would result in abuses which would endanger and even permanently destroy all their livelihoods and life itself. There would still be the possibility of generating electrical energy by means of huge solar power plants, which circulate in Earth orbit and from which the Earth could be supplied with electrical energy on a large scale. At least that is how I remember that you once spoke of such a technology, which is used on any world of your Federation and which solves the energy problems.
That is correct, but Earth humans are not yet capable of this technique and will not be for a long time to come either. Thermal power stations by using the inner Earth energy would, however, no longer be illusory with today's technology, but feasible if efficient work was done on the planning and realization of such power stations. This would solve all the problems on Earth concerning the necessary production of electrical energy and would avert the great dangers posed by the operation and the possible accidents and destruction of nuclear power stations, which can never be guaranteed to be completely safe, which is why they should be prohibited.
Unfortunately, your advice on this matter will also be disregarded and thrown to the wind. But I would like to ask you something else. Fukushima, where there are several nuclear meltdowns, so everything is much worse than at Chernobyl, as you explained. And you also said that at the beginning of the disaster, the tsunami caused a meltdown in one reactor, but that was denied from the very beginning.
What I said corresponds to the truth. The Chernobyl disaster was far surpassed, and the first meltdown in Fukushima occurred shortly after the tsunami had struck the reactors.
But that is still disputed today. Enormous lies and misinformation about the reality of the disaster are spread, and the Japanese people and the whole world population are deceived and taken for fools.
That is indeed the case.
And there could be even worse things happening on Earth if all the nuclear power plants are not shut down and not put out of commission.
This danger does indeed persist.
Look here, I have 2 plans from Andreas. It is if you can ask Quetzal for his opinion, and also you can say,
I will discuss this with Quetzal and give you our opinion.
thanks. What interests me now, there are an infinite number of universes, which also have different developments. That is to say, they are lower and higher developed. What is your knowledge about the natural laws of all these universes? Are they uniform or different?
According to our research findings, we know that universes like our Dern universe and its sister universe, the Dial universe, also have the same laws of nature as the parallel universe we discovered, which we call the Rodern universe, into which we could penetrate and explore. More highly developed universes, which no longer have a belt of matter, but only consist of pure fine or finest material energy, no longer have any laws of nature because they are only classified as energetic, fine or finest material laws. Laws of nature are thus only given in universes that have a matter belt in which such laws are active. But since we only know our Dern and the Dal and Rodern universes, which are all oriented in the same direction with respect to the laws of nature, we cannot say with absolute certainty whether there are other laws of nature than the ones we know, as they exist in our Dern and the Dal and Radern universes.
So far so clear, but there is another question that concerns me. Since there are infinitely many universes that one might imagine to be an infinitely gigantic pile of soap bubbles, I wonder why they all do not pressurize and not destroy each other. Admittedly, I know that the seventh belt, the ramming belt, serves on the one hand to allow the universe to expand, and on the other hand that two universes can align themselves like soap bubbles without destroying each other.
Our very far-reaching knowledge says that in absolute non-space, in addition to 7 absolutum universes, there are also 1049 different universe forms which exist in infinite numbers and which all have different stages of development. From the simple universe, as it is our Dern universe, up to the most highly developed fine material, spiritual, energetic universe form. But what they all have in common is that they all consist of 7 different belts, also the finest material energetic belts. It is also common to them all that they are all uniformly energetically poled in the ram belt, in the outermost belt area. This is the reason why all the most different universes do not interfere with each other in any way, and therefore they also do not collide directly with each other and cannot become dangerous.
In a structure of soap bubbles, there is only a thin skin from one bubble to the other. Therefore, in the universes, the outermost edge of the ramming belt must have a specially formed energy layer, so to speak, through which practically no collision with another universe respectively with its ramming belt can occur. This outermost energy layer of the ramming belt would therefore be present in all universes in the same way, and with the same polarization, and would prevent universes from being able to pressurize each other or even destroy each other, if I have understood you correctly. The only thing that can happen is that the universes repel or respectively displace each other, whereby the multi-universe expands more and more, if I may say and explain it in this way. If I have understood the whole thing correctly, then all universes, all lower ones as well as all higher and highest ones, are equally polarized in the outermost part of their ramming belts, so that they repel each other, as is also the case with magnets of the same polarity, which repel each other and keep a certain space between each other.
This is very well explained and corresponds to the effective facts.
Some researchers suspect that there really are many universes, and that a so-called Big Bang has taken place in each one of them, which is in line with the facts. But scientists are not yet ready to know that new universes will continue to be created endlessly. They also suspect that the individual universes, which they compare with bubbles respectively with soap bubbles, deviate from our Dern universe with regard to the laws of nature, so that there must be universes without stars. Of course they are right, except that in the fine and ultra-fine energetic universes there are no laws of nature. But according to your explanation, there are only fine and ultra-fine energetic laws, so that in such universes there can be no matter belts and no galaxies. Suns, planets, meteors, and comets, etc. But it is well known that there is still a great deal that our scientists do not know, which is why they have to keep revising. Today they do not even know that our Dern universe, like every other universe, also consists of 7 different egg-shaped, respectively oval belts, and that in our universe the 4th belt alone represents the material part of the universe. They also do not know that all galaxies move in such a way that they move towards a certain point in the material universe, where a constant change takes place and where matter renews itself. So the matter belt experiences a complete renewal in the course of 49 billion years.
The research of earthly scientists is still based on pure assumptions and not on actual knowledge.
I know that, but I still find it narrow-minded. Then something else. In FIGU Special Bulletin Number 10 of February 1997, I wrote the following.
Discovery of Cleopatra's Palace.
Alexandria, Egypt, in September 1996. Divers made a sensational find in the harbor basin of Alexandria. They discovered the remains of the 2,000-year-old palace of the legendary Egyptian Queen Cleopatra. Everything is said to be lavish, incredibly luxurious and colorful in relation to the treasures found at a depth of 7 meters. Numerous obelisks, columns, statues, amphorae, and remains of walls have also been discovered. Cleopatra's palace was without doubt also the refuge and sanctuary of her husband Mark Antony. Alexandria was founded in 331 BC and went down in history because of the love affairs between Cleopatra and the Roman generals Mark Antony and Julius Caesar. The Egyptian lived a life of luxury in Rome for 2 years before Julius Caesar was murdered in 44 BC. Mark Antonius fell for the charms of Cleopatra 3 years after Caesar's death. In the year 31 BC, Cleopatra killed herself with snake poison when Mark Antonius lost the Battle of Actium against Octavian. After a strong earthquake and a subsequent huge tidal wave, the royal palaces sank into the Mediterranean Sea.
Before I wrote that Cleopatra killed herself with snake poison, I asked you if this was really so. But now, an American, a profiler named Pat Brown, is coming to claim that this was not the case, and that Plutarch had passed on everything wrong. What can you say to this?
Cleopatra the Great was the 7th Egyptian queen of that name, and ascended the throne at the age of 18 in 51 B. Emmanuel Notbilly, alias Christ. Cleopatra's father and mother were siblings, so if she was an incest child, she quickly became aware of the power. When she came to the throne, she knew how to use her power to the full. Also towards her brother Ptolemaeus VIII, with whom she reigned together, but who soon expelled her, but died already 47 years B. Emmanuel, and this by force, as our records show. After the expulsion, Cleopatra turned to the Roman Caesar for help, who returned her rule after heavy fighting after the Alexandrian War. From 46-44 B. Emmanuel, she lived in Rome, had with Emperor Caesar a son named Caesarion, who was born in 47 B. Emmanuel. After Caesar's assassination, Cleopatra returned to Egypt, where she elevated her son to co-regent. When a civil war broke out in 43-42, she remained wisely neutral and renounced her exercise of power for the time being. Then she won in 41 B. Emmanuel the Roman Antonius for herself, with whom she entered into a marriage and remained united with him until her death. Antonius encouraged her desire for power, also in relation to giving the dynasty and Egypt new power and new splendor. When Octavianus, later to become Emperor Augustus, appeared in Rome, Cleopatra was declared an enemy of Rome because there were clauses in Antony's will, which Octavianus published, that favored Cleopatra's children. This led to Rome declaring war on Cleopatra. Thus, the battle that was waged against Antonius was officially considered a battle against Cleopatra. When in 31 B. Emmanuel the Battle of Actium was lost, Antonius and Cleopatra fled to Egypt and killed themselves in 30 B. Emmanuel. Cleopatra killed herself with snake poison, which she poured into a deep wound on her arm, which she had a servant inflict on her, and with other poison, which she ingested by drinking a prepared cup of poison, which was also mixed and served to her by a servant. In truth, she could not cope with defeat in her obsession with power, so she judged herself, as many power-obsessed people have done since ancient times, when they suffered defeats and lost their power.
A cowardly escape from responsibility, as was also the case with Hitler and others. But tell me, do you know anything about why she threw herself at the men, like Caesar and Antony? Was it really just to help them, to get back their power and to be able to exercise it?
Cleopatra was not only obsessed with power, she was also an unscrupulous paramour, for Caesar and Antony were only her main lovers, who were her means to an end.
I actually do not want to know more.
Then I consider today's conversation to be over because I have to go my way, because I still have important things to do in the next few hours. It will also have to be that Florina brings you our answer concerning Andrew's 2 plans, because I will not have time to come here myself for the next 3 weeks.
If you are already working on the 2 plans, Then I would also like to ask you what has happened regarding the renovation of the eastern front of the center. You said that you would also discuss that.
Florina will also tell you about that, because I must confess that it has slipped my mind to have to decide with Quetzal and the others.
Not too bad. When Florina comes then. So I guess you will be leaving now?
Yes, Edward, my friend. Farewell, and we will meet again after 3 weeks at the earliest.
So until then, take care and Salome.